In the heart of Mississippi's Delta region, where cotton fields stretched endlessly beneath oppressive summer heat, there stood a barn that no one was permitted to enter. For 40 years, 4 decades of whispered conversations, averted eyes, and carefully constructed lies, the wealthy family guarded this structure with an intensity bordering on obsession. The barn sat at the edge of their plantation, visible from the main road yet somehow invisible to the outside world. Neighbors learned not to ask questions. Workers understood that curiosity came with consequences, and the family itself maintained a silence so complete, so suffocating that it became the defining characteristic of their household. But in 1846, when a young census taker arrived at the plantation with nothing but a ledger and a determination to count every soul in Mississippi, he would stumble upon a secret buried deeper than any grave, a secret that would force the wealthy family to confront the impossible choice between preserving their reputation and protecting the truth. Before we continue with the story of that wealthy family and the mystery of that locked barn, I want to invite you to be part of this investigation. Where are you listening from today? Drop your state or city in the comments below. I'd love to know if any of you are listening from Mississippi or have family connections to the Deep South. But first, let's return to 1846, to a time when secrets were currency and silence was survival. The Mississippi Delta in the 1840s was a landscape of contradictions. On the surface, it appeared prosperous and orderly. The cotton industry had transformed the area into one of America's wealthiest regions, and the planters who controlled the land wielded power that extended far beyond their property lines. They influenced politics, shaped social hierarchies, and determined the fates of thousands of enslaved people whose labor generated their wealth. The climate was brutal. Summers brought temperatures exceeding 100 degrees, humidity so thick it felt like breathing through wet cloth, and a landscape that seemed to absorb heat and radiate it back with malevolent intensity. Mosquitoes swarmed in clouds during warm months, carrying diseases that killed indiscriminately. The soil was rich and dark, capable of producing extraordinary yields, but it demanded constant labor, constant vigilance, and a willingness to exploit human beings without mercy. The wealthy family had established themselves in the region 3 generations prior. They weren't among the oldest planter families, but they had proven themselves equally capable and ruthless. By 1846, they controlled over 2,000 acres of prime cottonland and enslaved more than 300 people. The main house was substantial, not as grand as some plantation mansions dotting the region, but impressive nonetheless. It had been built in the federal style with white columns and a wraparound porch, commanding a view of fields stretching to the horizon. The family's reputation was solid. They were known as strict but fair, which, in the context of the time, meant they didn't engage in the most egregious forms of cruelty, though they certainly engaged in cruelty nonetheless. They attended church regularly, participated in community affairs, and maintained the social connections necessary to preserve their status. But something about the wealthy household made people uncomfortable. It was difficult to articulate, and no one dared speak of it openly. Yet there was a quality to the family's interactions that suggested hidden tensions, unspoken resentments, and carefully maintained facades. The patriarch, Thomas Rich, was a man in his 60s by 1846, with grey hair and a weathered face suggesting years of sun exposure and the weight of managing a large plantation. His wife Margaret was nearly 20 years his junior, a second marriage, as his first wife had died under circumstances never fully explained. She was a beautiful woman with dark hair and pale skin she protected obsessively from the sun. She rarely left the house and seemed to exist in perpetual anxiety. They had 3 children together. William, 22, who had begun taking on more plantation management responsibilities. Catherine, 19, recently married off to a neighboring planter in an arrangement clearly more about consolidating land and power than romantic attachment. And James, 16, who seemed to exist in constant tension with his father. There were also 2 older children from Thomas's first marriage, Robert, 35, who managed much of the plantation's day-to-day operations, and Elizabeth, 32, who had married and moved to Louisiana, though she returned occasionally to visit, always with a palpable sense of dread that anyone observing her could notice. The barn in question stood approximately 300 yards from the main house, positioned between the residential area and the cotton fields. It was substantial, built from sturdy timber and roofed with shingles weathered to dark grey. The doors were heavy, reinforced with iron bands, and always locked. A chain and padlock secured them, and Thomas Rich himself kept the key. No one else had access. Workers had been instructed never to approach the barn, never to look toward it, and certainly never to ask about it. Over the years, various explanations had been offered by those working on the plantation. Some said it contained valuable equipment needing protection. Others suggested it stored sensitive documents or valuable goods. A few whispered that Thomas kept his most prized horses there, though no one had ever seen horses led in or out. The truth, however, was far more complex and disturbing than any of these explanations, a truth maintained through extraordinary will, coordination, and the kind of silence that only fear can enforce. The year 1846 found the United States engaged in a complex political moment. The nation was expanding westward. Tensions between North and South were beginning to crystallize around slavery's expansion into new territories, and a growing sense emerged that the country was approaching some kind of reckoning. The federal government, seeking to maintain control and understanding of its rapidly changing population, had mandated a comprehensive census. Census takers were dispatched to every county, township, and plantation, armed with ledgers and authority to count every person within United States boundaries. The man who arrived at the Rich plantation on a Tuesday morning in late May was named Henry Thornton. He was 34 years old, originally from Connecticut, and had taken the census taker position partly out of economic necessity and partly from genuine belief in accurate record-keeping. He was meticulous, with a thin face and sharp eyes that seemed to notice everything. He had been trained to be thorough, to ask questions when numbers didn't add up, and to verify information through multiple sources. He was not, however, prepared for what he would encounter on the Rich plantation. Thornton arrived on horseback, carrying his leather satchel containing ledgers, ink, and writing implements. Dusty from travel, he was eager to complete his work efficiently. The plantation was large, and he had been warned it might take several days to properly count and document all residents. He had already completed censuses at 3 other county plantations and had developed a routine. First, he would meet the household patriarch, establish the number of free residents, document their names and ages, and then move on to counting the enslaved population, typically done more quickly with less individual attention. Thomas Rich received him in the main house parlor, a room designed to impress with high ceilings, good furniture, and windows overlooking the fields. Thomas was cordial but reserved. He offered Thornton refreshment, which was accepted, then provided information about the household's free residents. The numbers seemed straightforward. Thomas himself, age 63, Margaret, age 45, William, age 22, James, age 16. He mentioned that Catherine had recently married and moved to another plantation, and that Robert, his eldest son from his first marriage, maintained a residence on the property but was technically independent. Elizabeth, he noted, lived in Louisiana but visited occasionally. Thornton wrote carefully, cross-referencing with information learned from neighbors and other sources. The numbers seemed consistent, but as he prepared to move on to enumerating the enslaved population, he noticed something odd. When he asked about the total number of people living on the plantation, a standard question designed to catch discrepancies, Thomas's answer seemed to hesitate slightly. The pause was brief, barely noticeable, but enough to trigger Thornton's attention. And the total number of souls on this property, Mr. Rich, including all enslaved persons, all family members, all workers and dependents. Thomas answered with a number lower than what Thornton had been told by workers at neighboring plantations. The discrepancy wasn't enormous, perhaps 10 or 15 people, but it was significant enough to warrant investigation. Thornton had learned through his work that plantation owners often underreported enslaved populations to avoid certain taxes and regulations. But he had also learned that sometimes discrepancies pointed to something more sinister. People went missing. People were sold without being recorded. People died and were buried without official documentation. "I'll need to conduct a thorough count," Thornton said carefully. "With your permission, of course. I'll need to visit the quarters, speak with the overseer, and verify the numbers independently." Thomas's response was immediate and firm. "Of course. The overseer will cooperate fully. But I should mention that we've had some recent changes in our workforce. Some workers have been sold, others have run away. The numbers may not be entirely stable." This wasn't unusual. Thornton had heard similar explanations at other plantations, but something in the way Thomas said it, the careful control in his voice, the way his eyes seemed to be calculating something, suggested there was more to the story. Over the next 2 days, Thornton conducted his census. He visited the quarters where enslaved people lived, a collection of rough cabins arranged in rows. He counted people, asked their names and ages, and recorded the information in his ledger. The enslaved people he encountered were wary but cooperative, as instructed. None seemed to be hiding anything, though Thornton noticed they were careful in their responses, as if coached on what to say. The overseer, a man named Garrett Hutchkins, was helpful and seemingly forthcoming. He provided worker lists, explained recent workforce changes, and answered Thornton's questions with apparent candor. But when Thornton compared numbers gathered from the enslaved people themselves with those provided by Hutchkins and Thomas, a discrepancy of approximately 8 to 10 people remained. On the evening of his second day, Thornton decided to walk around the property. He wanted to understand the layout, grasp the plantation's geography, and perhaps observe things not apparent during formal interviews. As he walked, he noticed the barn. It was impossible not to notice, substantial, well-maintained, standing out from other buildings on the property. But what struck Thornton most forcefully were the security measures surrounding it: the heavy padlock, reinforced doors, chain. These weren't typical for a storage building. They suggested something valuable needing protection, not just from theft but from access. Thornton approached and examined the barn more closely. The solid doors showed no signs of recent opening. The lock was substantial and well maintained. There were no windows, no ventilation openings he could see. The structure was, in essence, sealed. He walked around the perimeter looking for gaps or openings but found none. The barn was a fortress. He returned to the main house and, over dinner with Thomas and Margaret, mentioned the barn casually. "That's quite a secure structure you have there," he said, gesturing vaguely toward it. "Must contain something quite valuable." Thomas's response was immediate and definitive. "It's used for storing equipment and supplies that need protection from elements and theft. Nothing more. It's not relevant to the census." But the way he said it, the firmness, the finality, suggested it was, in fact, quite relevant. Thornton had learned through his work that the most important secrets were often the ones people insisted were unimportant. That night, Thornton lay in the guest room of the rich household, unable to sleep. His mind kept returning to the discrepancy in numbers, to the locked barn, to the subtle tensions he had observed in family interactions. He had been trained to be thorough, to follow up on inconsistencies, and to trust his instincts. His instincts told him something was wrong. The next morning, Thornton decided to approach the problem differently. Instead of asking direct questions, he began observing and listening. He spent time in the quarters, engaging enslaved people in casual conversation. He asked about work, conditions, recent workforce changes. Gradually, through careful questioning and attentive listening, he pieced together a picture contradicting the official narrative. One older enslaved woman named Ruth, who worked in the main house, mentioned in passing that there had been changes in the family in recent years. When Thornton pressed gently, asking what kind of changes, Ruth became evasive, but her hesitation was revealing. There was something she wanted to say but was afraid to say. Another worker, a man named Samuel who worked in the fields, made a comment about the child when Thornton was asking about the family's composition. When Thornton asked what child he meant, Samuel immediately backtracked, claiming he had misspoken. But the word had been spoken, and it hung in the air between them. Thornton also noticed that when he asked about James, the 16-year-old son, responses were oddly evasive. People seemed uncomfortable discussing him. When Thornton asked to interview James directly as part of the census process, he was told James was away from the plantation on business. But Thornton had seen James the previous day walking in the gardens near the main house. The pieces weren't fitting together, and Thornton's frustration grew. He had a responsibility to produce an accurate census and was being prevented by what appeared deliberate obstruction. On the morning of his 4th day at the plantation, he made a decision. He would request a private meeting with Thomas Rich and demand an explanation for the discrepancies he had identified. The meeting took place in Thomas's study, a room lined with books and dominated by a large desk. Thomas seemed unsurprised by the request, as if expecting it. He listened as Thornton outlined the discrepancies: missing people, evasiveness from workers, inconsistencies in accounts provided by different household members. "There are approximately 10 people unaccounted for," Thornton said. "I need an explanation, Mr. Rich. It's my responsibility to ensure the census is accurate." Thomas was silent for a long moment. He stood and walked to the window, looking out over his fields. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and controlled. "Mr. Thornton, you are a man of principle. I respect that. But you must understand there are matters extending beyond a census's scope, family matters, private matters that cannot be made public without causing considerable harm." "I'm not interested in causing harm," Thornton replied. "I'm interested in accuracy. The federal government requires an accurate count. If people live on this property, they must be counted. And if those people are no longer living on this property," Thomas asked, "if they are, in fact, no longer here, then I need to know what happened to them. Were they sold? Did they run away? Did they die?" Thomas returned to his desk and sat down. He folded his hands, and for a moment seemed wrestling with something internal, some profound conflict between competing obligations. "There is a matter," he said finally, "that I cannot discuss with you directly. But I can tell you the discrepancy you've identified is not deception or fraud. It results from complicated circumstances not relevant to the census." "How can they not be relevant?" Thornton pressed. "If people live on this property, they must be counted. If people lived here and no longer do, I need to know what happened to them." Thomas stood again, and this time firmness in his posture suggested the conversation was over. "I will provide you with a corrected resident list," he said. "You will include that list in your census, then leave this plantation and never speak of this matter again. Do you understand?" Thornton felt a chill. Something in Thomas's tone, in the way he looked at him, suggested this wasn't a request but a threat. And Thornton, a careful man, not a brave one, understood he was in a situation beyond his control. "I need to know what's in that barn," Thornton said, making a decision that surprised even himself. "I need to know what you're hiding." For a moment, Thomas's composure seemed to crack. His face flushed, his hands clenched into fists. But then he took a breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was steady. "What's in that barn is none of your concern, Mr. Thornton. And if you value your safety and future, you will not pursue this further. Now I suggest you complete your census based on the information I've provided, then depart this plantation." Thornton left the study feeling shaken. He had encountered resistance before, but nothing quite like this. The intensity of Thomas's reaction, the barely concealed threat, suggested whatever was in that barn wasn't simply tax evasion or minor fraud. It was something Thomas Rich was willing to threaten a federal census taker to protect. At this point in our story, we're beginning to see outlines of a mystery going far deeper than simple plantation management. The locked barn, the missing people, the family's desperate need to keep secrets, these aren't the concerns of an ordinary household. If you're finding yourself drawn into this mystery, Wondering what could possibly be hidden in that barn worth threatening a federal official, you're experiencing exactly what Henry Thornton experienced. This is the moment where curiosity becomes dangerous, where asking right questions can put you in harm's way. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments what you think is hidden in that barn. But first, let's continue with what Thornton discovered next. That evening, Thornton made a decision, setting in motion events that would ultimately expose the rich family's darkest secret. He decided to investigate the barn himself. A reckless decision born of frustration and a sense he was being prevented from doing his job. But it also reflected his fundamental belief in truth and accuracy. After the household had gone to bed, Thornton made his way to the barn. The night was dark, with only a sliver of moon providing minimal illumination. He moved carefully, aware he was trespassing and discovery would likely mean immediate expulsion from the plantation, or worse. He carried a small lantern, kept shuttered to avoid attention. The barn doors were, as expected, locked, but Thornton had come prepared with a small set of tools, nothing sophisticated, but enough to work a simple padlock. It took nearly 30 minutes of careful manipulation, but eventually the lock gave way. The chain fell loose, and the doors swung open with a creak impossibly loud in the quiet night. Thornton stepped inside, his heart pounding. He opened his lantern slightly, allowing light to spill into darkness. What he saw in that moment would haunt him for the rest of his life. The barn wasn't empty. It was, in fact, occupied, but not by equipment, supplies, or horses. It was occupied by a person, or rather by a space carefully prepared for someone to live in. There was a cot, a chamber pot, a small table with a pitcher and basin. There were blankets, clothing, and a collection of books. Evidence of habitation, someone living in this space, hidden from the world, but the person wasn't there. The space was empty, though showing signs of recent occupation, blankets rumpled as if someone had recently slept. The pitcher containing water, crumbs on the table suggesting a recent meal. Thornton's mind raced. Someone was living in this barn. Someone was being kept here, hidden away. But who? And why? He began searching more carefully, looking for clues explaining what he was seeing. He found a journal hidden beneath the cot. His hands trembled as he opened it and began reading. The handwriting was careful and precise, educated, intelligent. The entries were dated, spanning several years. The first entry was from 1806, 40 years prior. The author wrote about being brought to the plantation, separated from family, the fear and confusion of a new situation. But the tone wasn't that of someone recently enslaved. The language was too sophisticated, the perspective too complex. As Thornton read further, entries became more detailed. The author wrote about life on the plantation, work, relationships with other people. But something odd emerged. The entries seemed written from a perspective both inside and outside the family. The author wrote about Thomas Rich with familiarity suggesting close relationship. The author wrote about Margaret, William, Catherine, James, the tone suggesting intimate knowledge of their lives, thoughts, secrets. And then, in an entry from 1820, the author wrote something making Thornton's blood run cold. Today I overheard father and mother discussing my future. They are afraid I'll be discovered, that someone will realize the truth. Father says the barn is the only solution, that I must be kept hidden, my existence erased from official record. I do not understand why my existence is so threatening. I do not understand why I must be hidden away like a shameful secret. But I understand I have no choice. I understand my life as I knew it is over. Thornton's hands shook holding the journal. The implications were staggering. This journal's author was someone being kept hidden by the rich family. Someone treated as a secret, something needing erasure. But who? And why? He continued reading, moving through entries chronologically. The author wrote about time passing, hope slowly eroding, routines and habits developing making confinement bearable. The author wrote about books, reading, using imagination as escape. The author wrote about other family members, their visits to the barn, conversations in this hidden space. And then, in an entry from 1835, the author wrote something providing a crucial puzzle piece. Today William brought me news from outside. He told me about changes in the country, growing tensions over slavery, debates in Congress. He told me there are people fighting for enslaved people's freedom, people believing slavery is a moral evil. I asked him if that meant I might someday be free. He didn't answer, but his silence was answer enough. Thornton realized with shock that this journal's author wasn't enslaved. The author was a rich family member, someone kept hidden not because enslaved, but because of who they were, because of something about their identity so threatening to the family they chose hiding rather than acknowledgement. He continued reading, searching for more clues, something explaining the mystery completely. And then, in an entry from 1840, he found it. Today I asked Mother why I must remain hidden. I asked if there was any possibility I might someday live normally, interact with the world, have relationships outside this barn. She wept. She told me it was impossible, my existence was a source of shame to the family, allowing me to be known would destroy everything they'd built. I asked what I'd done to deserve this punishment. She said I'd done nothing, the fault lay with her, with Father, with circumstances of my birth. Then she left, and I was alone again. Thornton closed the journal, his mind reeling. He now understood the basic mystery outline. Someone in the rich family had been hidden away, kept in this barn for decades, their existence erased from official records, their life confined to this small space. But he still didn't know complete truth, the identity of this journal's author, the specific circumstances leading to this extraordinary decision to hide them away. He was so absorbed in thoughts that he didn't hear footsteps approaching the barn, didn't hear someone moving through darkness outside. He only became aware of another presence when a voice spoke from the doorway. I wondered when someone would find this place. Thornton spun around, journal still in hands. Standing in the doorway, illuminated by faint lantern light, was a figure he hadn't expected, James Rich, the 16-year-old son of Thomas and Margaret. But something was different about him in this moment, not the anxious, tense young man Thornton had glimpsed around the plantation. He was calm, almost resigned, as if waiting for this moment, as if knowing someone would eventually discover truth. "What are you doing here?" Thornton asked, voice unsteady. "I could ask you the same," James replied. "But I think we both know the answer. You found the journal. You've read about the person who lives here. You're trying to understand the mystery. Who lives here?" Thornton asked. "Who is being kept in this barn?" James was silent for a moment. Then, "Someone who shouldn't exist. Someone whose existence embarrasses the family. Someone hidden so long they've become a ghost, a shadow, a secret everyone knows but no one acknowledges." "I don't understand," Thornton said. "Tell me plainly. Who is in this barn?" And James, with a sigh containing years of burden and secrecy, began speaking. "My mother," James said, "wasn't always my mother. Before she married my father, she was someone else, had a life, family, different identity. She was born in New Orleans, daughter of a French merchant and a mixed-race woman. My father met her traveling and fell in love. But there was a problem. Her mother wasn't white and in this country, this time, that made her unsuitable to be a man like my father's wife." James paused, and Thornton could see conflict in his face, struggle between family loyalty and need to speak truth. "My father wanted her," James continued. "Wanted her enough to marry her, bring her to Mississippi, establish her as his wife. But he couldn't acknowledge truth about her origins, couldn't admit marrying a mixed-race woman. So he created fiction, told people she was a French planter's daughter from Louisiana, her family respectable and white. Everyone accepted fiction because easier than acknowledging truth." "But that's not the secret," Thornton said. "That's not why someone's kept in that barn." "No," James agreed. "That's not the secret, but it's the secret's foundation. You see, my mother, my adoptive mother, Margaret, she and my father had a child together, born in 1806. And that child inherited my mother's features, skin darker than my father's, features suggesting mixed heritage. And my father realized he couldn't acknowledge this child, couldn't admit fathering a child with a mixed-race woman. It would destroy his reputation, standing, ability to function as a Mississippi planter. Thornton felt puzzle pieces falling into place. The child is still alive, still living in this barn. Yes, James said. My older sibling, my father's child with my mother. Born 1806, hidden away in 1810 when it became clear they couldn't be acknowledged. For 36 years they've lived in this barn, erased from official record, from family, from world. Why? Thornton asked, though already knowing answer. Why not simply send them away? Place them elsewhere? Because, James said, my father loves them as much as any of his children. And my mother loves them. They couldn't bear separation, but couldn't bear acknowledgement either. So they created this compromise, built the barn, kept them here, visited, brought food and books and comfort. But kept them hidden, secret, erased. Thornton looked down at the journal in his hands. This is their writing, their account of their life. Yes, James said. They're educated. My father ensured that, brought books, taught reading and writing. They're intelligent, articulate, capable. But none matters because of skin color, because of mother's heritage. In this country, this time, that's enough to condemn them to a life of hiding. Where are they now? Thornton asked. They're not here. No, James said. They're not here. That's the other part of the secret, the part my father desperately hides. James led Thornton out of the barn and back toward the main house. As they walked, James continued his narrative in a low voice, as if afraid someone might overhear. 3 months ago, James said, my older sibling decided they could no longer live in the barn. After 36 years in that space, they reached a point they couldn't endure, told my father they wanted to leave, try building life outside the plantation, outside Mississippi, go north, find somewhere to live openly without hiding who they were. And your father agreed? Thornton asked, surprised. No, James said. My father refused, said it was impossible, they'd be discovered, bring shame on family, said they had to remain hidden, for their protection as well as families. But my sibling was adamant, said they'd rather die than spend another year in that barn. They reached the main house. James paused at the entrance, seeming to gather courage for what he was about to say. My father, James continued, made a decision. He decided if my sibling couldn't be hidden, they'd have to be erased. Not killed, my father's not a murderer, though what he did was perhaps worse. He decided to sell them, send them south to New Orleans to be sold into slavery. He told himself it was for their own good, they'd be better off in a city where they could disappear into population, build new life. But truth, he was erasing them, taking his own child and selling them into slavery to protect reputation. Thornton felt revulsion wash over him. When did this happen? 2 months ago, James said. My sibling was taken from the barn and transported to New Orleans. My father paid a trader to handle the transaction. Official story is they ran away, escaped Plantation. But truth, they were sold, my father's own child sold into slavery. And the census, Thornton asked, the discrepancy in numbers? My father's trying to account for missing people, James said. Trying to make numbers work, explain disappearance without revealing truth, hoping if census numbers match official story, the secret will stay hidden, hoping no one will ever know what really happened. Thornton stood in darkness, journal still in hands, trying to process what he'd learned. The locked barn mystery, missing people, families' desperate secrecy, it all made sense now. But truth was far more disturbing than imagined, not simply hidden people or family secrets, but profound moral failure. A man willing to sacrifice his own child to protect reputation, a family complicit in a lie so fundamental it shaped their entire existence. Why are you telling me this? Thornton asked. Why betray your father's secret? James was silent long moments. When he spoke, his voice was anguished. Because I can no longer live with the lie. Because I've spent my entire life knowing truth, and the weight crushes me. Because my sibling deserves acknowledgement, remembrance, counting as human. Because the census should count every person, and my sibling was erased. Because what my father did was wrong, and I can no longer be complicit in hiding that wrong. We're now at this mystery's heart, the moment truth is about to be exposed, where a young man decides to betray his father's secret in justice and honesty's name. This is the kind of moral courage changing lives, destroying families, forcing societies to confront uncomfortable truths. If you're feeling this moment's weight, understanding James Rich's impossible position, you're beginning to grasp why this story has haunted the American South for generations. Share this video with someone who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support content, and subscribe never to miss stories like this. But first, let's see what happens when truth is finally revealed. Thornton spent the remainder of the night in profound moral conflict, given information not his to give, secrets not his to reveal, but also responsible for accuracy, truth, proper census functioning, counting every person including the one hidden in that barn for 36 years. By morning, he decided, he would include the missing person in his census, document the discrepancy, note someone hidden from official record, not reveal complete story, not his place, but ensure the person was counted, existence acknowledged in national official record. When Thomas Rich discovered Thornton's action, his reaction was explosive. He came to Thornton's room early morning, face flushed with anger, voice shaking. "You have betrayed my trust, violated my home and family's sanctity. You have no right including information in your census I haven't authorized." "I have every right," Thornton replied calmly. "It's my responsibility to count every person. Someone lives on this plantation hidden from official record, they must be counted." "That person isn't living on this plantation," Thomas said. "They're gone, ran away, no longer my responsibility." "Then you should have reported disappearance," Thornton said. "Should have provided explanation. Instead, you tried hiding they ever existed. I cannot allow that." Thomas's face deepened red. "You're a fool, Mr. Thornton, a fool who doesn't understand this world's complexities, believing truth and justice are simple matters resolved through bureaucratic procedures and official records. They're not. Sometimes truth must hide to protect people. Sometimes silence is mercy. And sometimes," Thornton replied, "silence is complicity. Sometimes hiding truth perpetuates injustice." Thomas left the room, and Thornton knew his time on the plantation ended. He completed census that day, including missing person notation, and prepared to leave. But before departing, something unexpected happened. Margaret Rich came to see him. She found him in the parlor packing belongings and asked private conversation. They sat in the same room where Thornton first met Thomas, and Margaret spoke with quiet intensity more powerful than Thomas's rage. "You don't understand what you've done, the consequences of your actions." "I understand I've documented truth," Thornton replied. "Ensured someone hidden is now acknowledged in official record." "You've destroyed my family," Margaret said. "Destroyed my marriage, children's futures, community standing. When word gets out about that census inclusion, people realizing there's a mixed-race child in the Rich family, everything falls apart." "Perhaps it should," Thornton said. "Perhaps a family built on such fundamental lie deserves to fall apart." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "You're very young, Mr. Thornton, believing in truth and justice power. But you'll learn the world's more complicated, that sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is hide truth, that protecting people means keeping secrets." "I don't believe that," Thornton said. "I believe truth is always better than lies. People deserve acknowledgement, counting, recognition as human beings." Margaret stood and walked to the window, looking over fields. "My child, the one I gave birth to, love more than my own life, that child is now enslaved. Held in bondage because of skin color, my heritage, birth circumstances. My husband sold them to protect reputation, and you've ensured this fact records in official census, becomes historical record known forever." She turned back to face Thornton, expression profoundly sad. "I hope you'll find comfort knowing you've told truth. I hope that sustains you when realizing full consequences of your actions. Thornton left Rich Plantation on a grey afternoon, horse-laden with satchel and ledgers. He didn't look back at main house, didn't look toward locked barn, rode away with learned weight pressing down, knowledge he'd set events in motion with far-reaching consequences. The census was filed with federal government. The missing person notation was included, with Thornton's explanation of discrepancy unaccounted for. The document was filed in archives where it might have remained unnoticed had not events unfolded over following months. Word of discrepancy in Rich family's census began circulating through community. Neighbors started asking questions. Rumors spread. Some speculated about unreported death. Others suggested scandal, some family secret hidden. The more people talked, rumors grew until truth, or something close, began emerging. Within 6 months of Thornton's departure, Rich family reputation was severely damaged. Thomas Rich found himself ostracized from social circles he'd moved in. Business associates distanced themselves. Social invitations ceased. The once respected influential family became gossip and speculation subject. Strain on family was immense. Margaret withdrew further, spending most time in her room. William, eldest son, found marriage and advancement prospects severely diminished by scandal. Catherine, married to another prominent family, found herself awkwardly positioned, caught between birth family loyalty and protecting own reputation. James, who'd revealed truth to Thornton, found himself in impossible position, had done what he believed right but destroyed family. He was viewed with suspicion by father, resentment by siblings, pity by community, the person who betrayed family secret, carrying that burden for life. Robert, eldest son from Thomas's first marriage, took over much plantation management as Thomas withdrew from active business. But even Robert found scandal affected effective functioning, workers questioning authority of thoroughly discredited family. Thomas Rich himself seemed aging rapidly under scandal weight, the man so determined protecting reputation, willing to sell own child into slavery to maintain standing, found reputation destroyed anyway. The very thing he'd most feared had come to pass, not because of truth about wife's heritage or child's existence, but because of desperate attempt hiding that truth. As scandal deepened, a new question emerged. What happened to the child hidden in barn? Were they still alive? Truly sold into slavery, or escaped? These questions consumed James Rich. He'd revealed truth hoping for justice, acknowledgement of wrong done. Instead, only scandal and family destruction, not sibling liberation, only family humiliation. Driven by guilt and desperate need for amends, James began investigating siblings' fate using connections, money, plantation knowledge to trace siblings' path. He discovered Thomas had indeed sold them to a trader named Josiah Crane, specializing in transporting enslaved people to Deep South. James traveled to New Orleans using family connections, trying to locate sibling, visited slave markets, spoke with traders, searched records. But trail had gone cold. Sibling had been sold, possibly multiple times, disappearing into slavery's vast machinery. No way knowing where, alive or dead, escaped or worked to death in Louisiana, Mississippi, or Alabama fields. Futility consumed James. He'd wanted finding sibling, helping, making amends for father's betrayal. But failed, sibling lost to slavery system, nothing he could do bringing them back. As years passed, locked barn stood empty. No one allowed entering, not because containing secret, but because secret revealed and person contained gone. The barn became family shame monument, physical reminder of Thomas Rich's terrible choice. Rich family fortunes continued declining. Scandal had damaged reputation beyond repair. Thomas Rich died in 1852, 6 years after Thornton's visit, death marking family beginning of end. Without his leadership, plantation began failing. The Civil War, beginning 1861, would ultimately destroy remaining family wealth and power. James Rich survived war but never married, never had children, spent remaining years managing plantation remnants, trying rebuilding what father destroyed, but never forgot sibling, never stopped wondering what happened, never stopped carrying guilt of revealing family secret. Margaret Rich lived until 1870, dying at 69. In final years, she became increasingly withdrawn and melancholic. Those knowing her said she seemed haunted, consumed by grief she couldn't express. She died without ever knowing Child's fate, without ever making amends for role in hiding and ultimately selling Child into slavery. The locked barn was eventually torn down sometime in 1880s, after Plantation abandoned and family scattered. But for decades it stood, physical reminder of rich families' terrible secrets, of price paid maintaining reputation and respectability. This mystery shows something profound about 19th-century American South, about lengths people would go maintaining racial purity fiction, about silence and secrecy's terrible cost. The locked barn wasn't simply where someone was hidden, it symbolized moral compromises the entire slavery system required, symbol of how families, communities, nations could conspire hiding uncomfortable truths, erasing inconvenient people, maintaining lies serving powerful interests. What do you think of this story? Do you believe Henry Thornton did right revealing truth? Or should he have respected family privacy? Do you believe James Rich was right betraying father's secret? Or should he have remained silent? Leave your comment below. If you enjoyed this tale and want more horror stories like this, subscribe, hit notification bell, share with someone loving mysteries. See you in next video. The true fate of rich families' hidden child remains unknown. No record exists of what happened after sold to Josiah Crane. No way knowing whether they survived, escaped, managed building life despite terrible circumstances. Their name lost to history, their story erased from official record except for Henry Thornton's census notation indicating discrepancy in numbers. But their existence, hidden life in locked barn, forced erasure from family and society, these things are real. These things happened. And they happened not through extraordinary circumstance, but through ordinary everyday choices people made protecting themselves, preserving reputations, maintaining lies, allowing sleep at night. The locked barn in Mississippi stood as testament to these choices, physical manifestation of moral compromises slavery required. And when finally torn down, it left only questions. What happened to Child living there? What became of them? Did they ever know existence acknowledged in census? That someone cared enough counting them, ensuring not completely erased from historical record? These questions can never be answered. But we must ask them, because in asking, we acknowledge humanity of those hidden, erased, sacrificed, maintaining comfortable lives of powerful. We acknowledge they existed, mattered. Their stories deserve telling even if we can never know complete truth of what happened. The locked barn is gone now, but questions remain, haunting us still, reminding us of silence's terrible price, of how secrets poison families and communities, of truth's importance even when difficult, painful, destructive. And somewhere in history's vast machinery, in records, documents, census forms surviving centuries, there's a notation indicating discrepancy, missing person, secret revealed. And that notation is all remaining of person living in locked barn. All remaining proving they existed, counted, mattered.